Hi and welcome to Old Time Knowledge. Well, it's been a while since I posted a video, and this one is actually a video that I recorded a few months ago, but I am only just now getting around to editing it together and recording a voiceover for it. But we're going to do this because this is important and this is one I've been wanting to do for a long time. Now, in 2020, a lot of us started baking more because we were home, and in the early part of that year especially, it was, getting groceries from the grocery store was just such a challenge. So a lot of us, dug out recipes, and here's one for classic sandwich bread from King Arthur flour. Don't worry that it's blurry. I will be putting this recipe in the show notes below. But this video isn't just about this particular recipe. Yes, I'm going to make this bread recipe, but what I wanted to talk about in this video is what you can do to actually make sandwich bread so that you can use it. That's a problem a lot of times we might have, is we might make something like this and then we'll have it and it doesn't get eaten fast enough, and then, within a couple of days it goes stale and a lot of it goes to waste. Also, it can be a real challenge if you're making any kind of sandwich bread, but you don't have something to cut the bread nicely with. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started making this recipe. Pretty basic ingredients. I'm going to take you through them step by step, but again, it doesn't really matter what white bread recipe that you use, but we're going to just talk about the whole package as far as making the bread, baking the bread, letting it cool, slicing it, storing it, the whole 9 yards. So this recipe calls for a packet of yeast. That's 2 1/4 teaspoons, but I've just gone ahead and used about 3 teaspoons of this yeast because the yeast is getting a little, it's been around a while, so I know that there might be a chance that it's not as active as it should be, so that's why I'm using a little more. But a packet of yeast would be 2 1/4 teaspoons. So that's the yeast. Now I need to add the liquid. So the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of milk and 1/2 to 2/3 of cup of hot water. And the reason for that is because when you mix them together, you get kind of a lukewarm liquid, which is perfect for activating your yeast and getting it going so that it'll start being nice and bubbly. Now you have to wonder what I just did there, because you just saw me put milk in a measuring cup that was a 1 cup measuring cup. But it's because I already had hot water in the bottom of the measuring cup, so I was just adding milk to top it off to make 1 whole cup. So basically 1/2 cup of milk to 1/2 cup of hot water. And if I need to add a little more water later, I can, but I would rather start off with less liquid and add it if I need it than to have too much right off the bat. Now I'm adding 2 tablespoons of sugar. This is actually a little 1/8 cup measuring cup that I have it's for coffee, but I use it for 2 tablespoons of sugar. That's got to get in there to get that yeast, to feed it, to get it really busy and hungry and active and ready to go. And next, I'm going to be adding oil. You can actually add 4 tablespoons of melted butter or oil. I'm using 4 tablespoons of olive oil. You can do either. It works just fine either way. Now comes time to add the flour. The recipe calls for 3 cups of flour. So let me move this bottle of olive oil over here, and I'll start adding the all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour. I don't typically buy it. I'm just using the all-purpose flour. In fact, I buy great big bags of all-purpose flour from Sam's Club, and then I divide them up into smaller bags that are about 5 pounds each, and then I put them in a storage bucket. Actually, it's a Vittles Vault thing. I bought a few of those a couple of years ago, and theirs are great. But that's where I keep my flour, and that way I always have plenty of flour on hand. So now that I've added the flour, it's time to add salt. I need to make sure that I'm adding a little bit of salt to the recipe because that's definitely important. Otherwise, it's going to lack flavor. So it calls for 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. Do y'all do that? Do you keep things like salt and different things like that in jars and other containers in your kitchen? Like my olive oil's in that glass bottle there. I have other big plastic containers of olive oil because I get it regularly, but I also keep it, salt and different things in jars. Now I'm actually adding a little bit of vinegar, and I know you're probably wondering, why are you adding vinegar to this? Well, the reason why you add vinegar to a loaf of bread is it can help help it keep a little longer, but it also makes for a nice soft loaf. I only added a teaspoon to this, so that's all that's really needed. I'm going to go ahead and just let my KitchenAid do the mixing and the kneading. And once it's well kneaded and I see that it's nice and stretchy and it's at that stage where it's ready to just let it rest and let it rise, then that's what I'm going to do. But it's going to take a few minutes of this kneading. I've just changed the angle here just to show you what it looks like, because you can see, I mean, clearly it's not mixed well yet, but you'll see what it looks like once it's done, because I'm going to get you to that part. All right, so the dough is done. I mean, I pretty much let you watch the whole thing. I sped it up a little bit here and there, but you want the dough to just really be nice and stretchy and totally incorporated. I didn't end up having to add any more liquid to it because the amount of liquid that I had was fine, even though it seemed dry at first. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the dough out of the bowl, and then I'm just going to grease the bowl a little bit, or grease the ball of dough. You can do it either way, and then put it back in the bowl, and I'm going to cover it and just let it rise as long as it takes. I'm not going to say how long, because you never can tell how long it's going to take. Sometimes it might take an hour, sometimes it might take less than an hour, sometimes it might take way more. It just depends on the temperature of your kitchen and how active the yeast is and all that good stuff. So I'm just going to do that, get everything ready. Then I'm going to put a grocery bag on it to just let it rest until the dough has doubled in bulk, nice and puffy, and then I'll punch it down and get it ready to put in the pan. Okay, you see how I did that. I just put a little bit of olive oil on my hands and rubbed my hands together. And what you see me doing with my hand down in the bowl is I'm pulling the dough away from the sides of the bowl. Since it's wanting to stick to the sides of the bowl a little, that's not a big deal. So after I've gotten it all pulled away from the sides of the bowl, I just have my olive oil covered hands, and I'm just getting the olive oil all over the dough, scraping out that last little bit that's in the bottom of the bowl. Because we want all that goodness in our loaf of bread. We don't want it sticking to the inside of the bowl. All right, and now what you see me doing is I'm just sort of shaping it into a ball. See how smooth it is? And as I pull it, it's not splitting, it's not cracking, it's not doing any of that. It's just holding together really nicely. It's a nice tight ball. I'm adding just a tiny bit more oil into the bowl. That way, when I put the dough in there, since I've kind of been handling the dough a bit with my greased hands, this way I can make sure there's also plenty of oil on the dough ball. And when it rises, I don't have to worry about it sticking to anything when it's time to get it out of this bowl. Yes, and this might look kind of silly, y'all, but I love reusing grocery bags this way. I mean, some people will put like a damp tea towel over their bowl. They'll do all kinds of things, but this works great. I mean, the plastic bag sort of traps the warmth in the bowl. I put the bowl on my stove. Often I might have things baking in the oven at that time. And so right now, though, it's already been resting for a long time, So that's why I've removed the bag, and you can look at that. See how big and puffy that ball of dough is? That's ready. I can tell that it's ready. So I am just going to get my parchment paper out so that I can get it ready to shape this dough for my baking loaf pan. So this is what I do. I use parchment paper because that way I don't have to put a lot of flour on my countertop or anything. It doesn't really stick to the parchment paper. I just dump it all out on top of my stove, and you see because of that oil, it just comes out really easily in one nice ball. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to pat this out because this is how I shape it. I have done different ways of making loaves of bread. There have been times in the past before I learned how to do this that I would just take the ball of dough and then press it down and then just sort of shape it into a log. But I have learned that it actually works quite well if you go ahead and you sort of flatten it out a little bit and then roll it up and then put it in your pan. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just sort of folding it over, pressing it down, getting it all sort of smushed out. And then the whole idea is when you roll it up like that, it just sort of makes sure that it's kind of even distribution of the dough. You don't end up with air pockets stuck in the middle of the loaf. That makes a prettier loaf as you're cutting it. Just a nicer result altogether. So you see, I'm just patting this out. I don't know. I'd say it's probably, probably about like a half an inch, maybe a little more than that. I have my baking pan. I'm spraying it with a little bit of cooking spray. And I love this pan. This pan has baked a lot of loaves of bread. So you see how I'm just rolling this, but then what I'll do is after I roll it, then I'll turn the ends under. And then it'll just have to be a nice little log of dough that can go into that pan and bake into the bread. And of course, I'm not going to just pop it right in the oven as soon as I put it in the pan. It's going to need to rise again. It won't have to rise as long this time, but it will need to rise again. So here you see me turning the ends over and under, and now I have my nice little log of dough, sort of pinching those ends down again, and I'm going to pick this up gently, carefully, and set it right in that pan. This is real life, y'all. This is not perfectly filmed, perfectly cut. You know, you'll see my little awkward attempts here at lifting this, but there it is. That's right there. So like I say, I'm just going to leave this until it starts to rise and starts to get puffy. My oven is preheating to 350 degrees. Once it is preheated and my dough is ready to go in the oven, then I'll be baking it for about 30 to 35 minutes or until the middle of the dough reaches about 195 degrees. As you can see, I'm just reusing that same plastic bag again. But here it's risen. You see that it's doming up over the top of the pan, and that means it's ready to go in the oven. I can just touch it and it slowly starts to spring back. It's not bouncing back super fast, which is perfect. That's what you want. So this is going to go in the oven now and bake, and then I will bring you back when it's done. All right, so now we're fast forwarding. The bread is done. The oven has sounded its alarm. I've checked the internal temperature of the bread, and here it is, y'all. Isn't that beautiful? This loaf is gorgeous, and I am going to take a stick of butter and just rub it over the top, and that helps to keep the top of the bread a little bit soft. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get it out of the pan and let this loaf of bread cool until it's completely at room temperature. Totally cooled down. It's nighttime, so it might even be sometime tomorrow before I slice this. But that's okay. You don't want to rush it. If you cut bread that's hot, that's right out of the oven, honestly, you're just going to wind up disappointed. And the reason why is because when you take bread out of the oven, it continues doing what's called carryover cooking. The heat inside of the loaf continues cooking the bread. Even though it's on your counter, it's not in the oven anymore. But that cooking, that final cooking that happens on your counter is so important. If you cut it too soon, one thing that happens is a ton of moisture evaporates from the bread in the form of steam leaving the bread. You're going to end up with a dry loaf. Chances are it's going to be too crumbly. It might fall apart. It's just not going to have that texture you're looking for. So trust me, just let it cool. And this doesn't mean stick it in your refrigerator. You can't cheat this. You just have to let it come down. It's kind of like when you have canned something. You can't like just put cold water on the canner because you'll wind up with siphoning. With this kind of thing, it's the same. You can't rush it. There's a process behind letting it wait and come down to temperature normally. That's what you want to do. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to turn my oven off here in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and cover this loaf of bread after I get this butter on. And then I will come back tomorrow and I will slice it so that you can see the best way to enjoy this kind of bread. If you make sandwich bread, you want to be able to make sandwiches with it. If you have had the same experience as I have, you have tried cutting sandwich loaves just free-handed, and the slices come out uneven. Some end up thicker than others. Sometimes they're thicker at the top than they are at the bottom, but I have a way around that. So stick with me until the end and you'll see. All right, so it's the next day. I left the loaf of bread cooling on my oven top all night last night. Yes, you do see some aluminum foil over my clock. I'll tell you why I do that in a minute maybe. This is what I want to show you. This is our daily bread slicing tool. You know, you might be like me, because honestly I laugh at this. I'm like, really? Do we have to have a tool for cutting bread? There's a reason why people say it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I honestly think it's because it's not as easy as it looks to slice bread evenly so that it's ready to make sandwiches with when you want to make sandwiches. So here I have this, and it's so great. It's got the little plexiglass thing at the end, holds the loaf in place. I just kind of hold it on top. I'm using my serrated bread knife. This is a fantastic knife. I will link it below. I will link this bread slicing contraption below. And the thing is, every single slice comes out so even, so perfect. This is what you want if you make a sandwich loaf. You want to have bread that's ready to use. You've got it in your kitchen. You don't have to worry about dragging out the loaf, getting the knife, trying to cut a slice, and then trying to cut another slice that's pretty even, and then make a sandwich. Now, this is what you want to do. You want to have one of these so that you can have your nice even slices and they're ready to go. Again, you can try as many different bread recipes as you want. I'm always trying new bread recipes. I like this one, but I like other ones too. But here you can see I have my slices. That's the end, and then one slice, and here I'm getting some more slices. Occasionally I miss cutting all the way to the bottom, so I'll just pinch it and kind of separate them, but there they are. They're totally ready. This is just delicious bread. Can't wait to use this for sandwiches or toast. You know, cinnamon toast is great with this. French toast is great with this. Anything you're using bread for, that's what you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting this, and I'll tell you why I've got the aluminum foil over the clock. It's because the light on the clock glows so bright that at night the light shines even in through the crack, like in my room, and I can't sleep. Those blue lights, I cannot sleep. It drives me nuts. I kind of have like a transom over my bedroom door, and so that light illuminates the whole kitchen, and so I end up seeing it. So that's why I put aluminum foil or an oven mitt or something like that over it, so that light doesn't bother me at night when I'm sleeping. But anyway, you see I'm getting close to the end of this as far as slicing all this. But, you know, then once you do this, yes, you can put it in a Ziploc bag. You can put it in like some kind of plastic container. I have these huge boxes that I get of bread bags. I love them because I can use them for any kind of baked goods, but I also use them for leftovers sometimes because there's tons and tons of them in a box. I will link those below also. But then I have a nice loaf of bread. Looks just like it came from the bakery section at the grocery store. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new, and that you will, if you've been frustrated with making homemade bread in the past and you've not found a way to make it so that it's actually usable for sandwiches and things, I hope this video gives you some ideas. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.